I'd like to let Foucault's own words articulate more precisely here the evolution of documentary individuation in relation to power. For a long time, Foucault writes, ordinary individuality, the everyday individuality of everybody, remained below the threshold of description. To be looked at, observed, described in detail, followed from day to day by an uninterrupted writing, was a privilege. The chronicle of a man, the account of his life, his historiography, written as he lived out his life, formed part of the rituals of his power. The more one possesses power or privilege, the more one is marked as an individual by rituals, written accounts, or visual reproductions. The name and the genealogy that situate one within a kinship group, the performance of deeds that demonstrate superior strength and which are immortalized in literary accounts, the monuments or donations that bring survival after death, all these are procedures of an ascending individualization. In a disciplinary regime, on the other hand, individualization is descending. As power becomes more anonymous and more functional, those on whom it is exercised tend to be more strongly individualized. It is exercised by comparative measures that have the norm as reference, rather than genealogies giving ancestors as points of reference." End quote. The norm is the new reference point, and yet the thing that makes the individual intelligible to discipline is, in large part, the collected attributes of his delinquency and pathology. We see the consequence today, for instance, in a recent study in the British Journal of Psychology, which claims that only 23% of the British population has no personality pathology. As Foucault writes, when one wishes to individualize the healthy, normal, and law-abiding adult, it is always by asking him how much of the child he has in him, what secret madness lies within him, what fundamental crime he has dreamt of committing. End quote. So, with the development of descending individuation, disciplinary methods, quote, lowered the threshold of describable individuality and made of this description a means of control and a method of domination. And this new describability is all the more marked in that the disciplinary framework is a strict one. The child, the patient, the madman, the prisoner were to become, with increasing ease from the 18th century, the object of individual descriptions and biographical accounts. End quote. Biographical accounts, but also autobiographical ones as well. As an effect of the disciplinary society's incitement to discourse, Joseph K. comes to feel that the only hope for his trial is to write a full and complete account of himself for the powers that be, what the novel calls his petition. All will be well, he thinks, when he has rendered himself inside and out into the registries of discipline, where he will finally be fully intelligible to power.
Admittedly, the petition meant an almost endless task. One needn't be particularly faint of heart to be easily persuaded of the impossibility of ever finishing the petition. Not because of laziness or deceit, the only things that kept the lawyer from finishing, but because without knowing the nature of the charge and all its possible ramifications, his entire life, down to the smallest actions and events, would have to be called to mind, described, and examined from all sides.
As Foucault says, quote, this turning of real lives into writing is no longer a procedure of heroization. It functions as a procedure of objectification and subjection. This written individuality is no longer a monument for future memory, but a document for possible use. These documentary techniques make each individual a case which at one and the same time constitutes an object for a branch of knowledge and a hold for a branch of power." End quote. So whereas at the beginning of his trial, Kay had imagined that he was merely performing as a disciplined subject, he would play along with the trial. It turns out that those performative acts are precisely how the individual becomes subjected. One might object that the concept of performance suggests the individual retains a psychic reserve independent of discipline. But look at Joseph K. He thinks he is merely performing discipline, but he believes simultaneously that the only way out of the world of discipline is to explain himself more deeply and thoroughly, to inscribe himself ever more diligently into the tables and registries of power. I think one of the most interesting cultural indications of our unconscious devotion to discipline is in the way we have explained the work of Franz Kafka to ourselves. The interpretations of Kafka that exist on film are representative of the fact that we would much rather believe him to be saying that the individual is free of discipline until he is threatened with violence, coercion, and imprisonment. Thus, in the most acclaimed adaptation of the trial, directed by Orson Welles in 1963, Welles feels compelled to insert into Kafka's vision precisely the repressive hypothesis that the novel clearly rejects. As the guards search through Joseph K.'s lodgings in the film, Welles has K. announcing, quote, "I'm sorry to disappoint you, but you won't find any subversive literature or pornography." Welles's thesis is clear. The state is coming down on Joseph K. to repress a desire within him that is otherwise free of discipline. It is predictable from the history of individuation we have already glimpsed that Welles chooses to represent this repressed desire as sexual desire.
I can remember my father looking at me, straight in the eye. "Come on, boy," you'd say. "Exactly what have you been up to?" And even when I hadn't been up to anything at all, I'd still feel guilty. You know that feeling? And the teacher at school making the announcement that something was missing from her desk. "All right, who's the guilty one?" It was me, of course. I'd feel just sick with guilt. And I didn't even know it was missing. Maybe, yeah, that must be it. Unless your thoughts are innocent. 100%. Can that be said of anybody? Even the saints have temptations.
The worst offender, however, in erasing Kafka's vision of a disciplinary society and replacing it with Orwell's totalitarianism, is surely Steven Soderbergh's ridiculous film Kafka, released in 1992. Soderbergh depicts a world of kidnapping, torture, and imprisonment, a regime of, quote, body snatching, as the protagonist puts it. The film loudly reiterates one of the most common and glaring misinterpretations of Kafka's work by portraying it in every frame as a paranoid vision. It is rare, in fact, to find commentary on Kafka's novels that does not rely on the concept of paranoia. Soderbergh obliges this misreading by positing in his film a hidden, removed, and coordinated totalitarian power, easily embodied in the figure of a single despotic mastermind. In the trial, however, the paranoid vision is the mythology that the novel explodes. One of the reasons that most adaptations fail to capture both the nightmare and the comedy of Kafka's work is that they do not want to acknowledge that K's trial is an organism without center, and one that has already enlisted the subject himself. There is no man behind the curtain. The inaccessible high judges, about whom K hears so much in the novel, are mere legends. There is no coherent, singular, and accountable center of power that is keeping its eye on Joseph K. It seems that our collective imagination wants to replace Kafka's depiction of permeating discipline with a comforting depiction of monstrous Orwellian totalitarianism. Comforting because we can always say with relief that we're not there yet.